Well, hello there. Welcome to part 4 of me conquering my Sega Genesis collection. With the legendary Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the Hyperstone Heist. Now I know some of you out there are like, Turtles in Time is the best. I love Turtles in Time, but this one's very special to me. Now, I do have to put it on hard because it is easier than Turtles in Time, for sure. Other than that, I'm leaving it on defaults. As the turtles say. I have to pick Raph. He so perfectly represents my inner rage and turmoil. My personal stance is that the voice samples and color palette and certain things like that are weaker in this game than Turtles in Time on Super Nintendo. But the sound in this one, and the speed and the smoothness of gameplay elevate it to the top spot for me for best 16-bit Turtles. I switched to the 3-button controller. I had been using the 6-button controller for the previous recordings, which is a great controller. I really like it. But having given this another chance after a number of years of not really paying it much mind, I really like the form factor better. I'm also hoping that it will be a little less noisy. I've noticed that the 6-button pad tends to be a little clickier, which doesn't matter so much, during live gameplay, to me, but for what the microphone picks up, I noticed it stands out a fair bit. One of the things that I like most about this versus Turtles in Time is having a dedicated dash button, which is part of the reason why the game is easier. It's certainly not the only reason, but it really just makes pulling off specific moves so much easier. Or evasions, like sometimes the slide attack is great for getting under certain attacks, for instance. Things like that sliding kick are much harder to do in Turtles in Time, because you either have to hold down your direction pad and wait for the dash to kick in, or at best you can double tap on a direction, but it just does not work as smoothly. the soundtrack was meant to live on Genesis. It's not even a fair comparison. You can't jam to this, you really have no soul. And I say what I say as a kid that grew up on the NES Turtles games. I mean, I played the shit out of Turtles the arcade game. Both the arcade cabinet at places like Chuck E. Cheese, and but especially at home on NES. Like, Turtles 2 and 3 were among the very few NES games that my family owned. So, I played the hell out of them. Be like, oh, you came home from school, homework's done. Well, guess I'm playing more Turtles. But my only exposure to Turtles in Time was one of my cousins had a Super Nintendo, and I would play it over there. And truth be told, that's a fantastic game, and I love it. But, you know, of course, I was especially biased as a young child. And as soon as I realized that this game existed, I think around the same time, I think I saw an ad for it in Sega Visions, and also it became available at one of my local rental stores. For some weird reason, it wasn't a game I ended up owning as a kid. I rented it, I think, several times. I think it just happened to be at that time where my only income was, like, a little bit of allowance, and that was for me doing things like cutting grass for family members. So it was still very sparse. Like, most of the games that I owned still ended up coming from, you know, birthday, Christmas, so, you know, waiting most of the year to, like, add any new games to the library. And this was around the time when I had ended up playing games like Gunstar Heroes, and was super infatuated with Star Trek The Next Generation on Genesis. And had even started binking around with games like Starflight. So for one reason or another, I felt as though I had gotten a sufficient fix in this game from renting it. But probably more so was me growing out of liking Turtles. The thing is, I never stopped having affection for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I mean, I was one of those kids that was basically, like, the prime target audience when the Turtles were at the height of their popularity in America. But, you know, growing up and starting the approach to teenage years, there was already that obsession with, like, oh, you know, I've already been bullied to death, so, you know, I have to try to appear cool at every turn possible and, like, you know, stay up with the trends. So, you know, the Power Rangers had taken over much of the popularity of the Turtles. You know, the Turtles never fully went away, but you know, a lot of the steam had definitely been taken out of the turtle craze by the time the Power Rangers really were in their prime in the US. So I think that's the other reason, is I no longer felt this compulsion to own as much stuff related to the Turtles. And then it followed that there were no Turtles games for the 5th generation consoles. Like, they totally skipped out on Saturn, PlayStation, and 64. Which is too bad, because I think a game of this style on Saturn, like really going for broke with the sprite scaling and 2D effects, would have been really something extraordinary, but... But this level reminds me of kind of a running hypothesis I have about this game's story. Not that the story is very important, you know, it's just... It's more or less like an extended episode of the cartoon, you know, it's not worth taking super seriously. But one thing I think is interesting to conjecture about the story is that since this game is kind of like a super remix of Turtles in Time, as well as some concepts and areas from games like Turtles 2 on NES, my kind of headcanon theory, if you will, is that this is a sequel of sorts to Turtles in Time, where the Turtles mostly fixed all of the things that Shredder was trying to do by meddling with the past in Turtles in Time. And that, like, this ghost ship that we're on, for instance, might be the same ship that the Turtles traveled back in time to when it was a pirate ship in its prime. And that maybe there was some kind of, something to do with the Hyperstone, was still on this ship. So that this is kind of like Turtles 5, if you prefer to call Turtles in Time Turtles 4. That sucks. See, the thing about the enemies in this is, like, it seems like I'm just mowing through them so easily, but, like, even the most basic enemies, if you give them the slightest opening, like, they will punish you. And the pace of the game is such that, I mean, you really have to continually be on it. And it's just so satisfying. Like, the impacts and the thuds in this game, it's just like, it's just endlessly satisfying. They explode so nicely. And that body slam can get repetitive, and it is a shame that there isn't anything that really stands in for the Mode 7 effect of slinging enemies into the screen, but still, the sound and that vibration, like the shaking of the screen when you do the body slam, is like, it's still so satisfying. These guys, if you don't corral them correctly, like, they can make your life an absolute misery. especially on hard, because there are fewer pizzas. You definitely have a lot less room for forgiveness. For those who don't know, this comes back from a time, especially during the 16-bit era, where games on different platforms were not only allowed to be different, but even encouraged. Like, you know, Konami could have just attempted to bring Turtles in Time to Genesis as closely as they could, but instead they opted to make something different. Just how, like, Super Nintendo got Castlevania 4, and then Genesis got Bloodlines. And then Genesis had Contra Hardcore, whereas Super Nintendo got Contra 3, The Alien Wars. You know, that sort of thing would never fly today. All the big companies, you know, they cry when, you know, a game doesn't have as much exact parity as possible with another platform's version of the game. And they'll extra cry if the game doesn't run as well or at as high resolution, you know? It's like come on. I miss that kind of diversity and variety. Like, honestly, as far as modern platforms go, it's kind of like, you know, Nintendo's the only one doing anything that has any kind of personality or character. Otherwise, it's more like, well, which game company's download cards do you like more, the blue one or the green one? Honestly, I mean, you're probably better off with just Steam or GOG versus anything that Microsoft or Sony's doing these days. I mean, I think the PlayStation 4 is decent, but when your competition is the Xbox One, it's it's kind of hard to lose that battle. Oh, and I'm, like, on the 4th video, and I just now remembered that I am supposed to explain why you keep seeing yellow alert in the OBS interface. And I have it set up so I can trigger a red alert as well. The first reason is simply that I'm a huge nerd, and any chance I can get to inject some Star Trek in, you know, I'm gonna take it. During my Twitch streams, it does have a practical purpose. If I trigger a yellow alert, it means that there's something like a storm watch. So, you know, nothing imminent, but like the possibility exists that, hey, like something could creep up during the broadcast that might have a chance to interrupt power or internet connection. If it's on red alert, that would be like there's an actual storm taking place, especially a severe one, and like, hey, that's a way of saying be ready for a possible unintentional interruption to the broadcast. Now, I purposely just left it here. I don't need it, but it's a conversation piece. Its practical use during a pre-recorded video would be indicating that, hey, I am not feeling 100%, especially if I had a close call with, like, having one of my classic migraine attacks. And if I had activated Red Alert during a pre-recorded video, that's probably something like, well, by rights, I'm probably too sick to be playing, but maybe I'm so close to being done that I'm just gonna try to tough it out. But, you know, if I seem to be in a lot of pain, it's for legitimate reasons. So, there you go. Something I meant to have in the first video, but it's I purposely left it there, and then 4 videos later I finally remembered to explain, like, why that's there. These guys that blocked, their equivalents on Turtles in Time are much more irritating to deal with. Which is doubly evil because on hard mode, those are the enemies that you're required to throw into the first Shredder boss fight. So you have to throw enemies into the screen. Whoops. Oh gosh, this is embarrassing. Okay. Oh, and I tell you, these mousers are like, even though they're a one-hit kill, they are absolutely, like, the worst. If they're in a particular frame of their jumping animation, they can interrupt one of your jumping attacks, and then if they get particularly close, they latch onto your arm, and it's just irritating. So this stage is one of the ones I mentioned. It's like a remix of a stage that was exclusive to Turtles the arcade game on NES, which is pretty cool. Especially because this version is not anywhere near as irritating. It does have certain gimmicks that would have been interesting if they were expanded upon, like this section has the spikes in the ceiling, so if you jump, you'll hit them. I think the game could have used more parts like that, where you have to be cautious about using certain kinds of attacks. Now, of course, this game is... Cannot believe that spike still hit me. What a jerk. What an absolute jerk. Okay. Like the Sonic games that I've been playing, this is now one of the more accessible must-play Genesis games. Up to a point, it was a bit obscure, because for the longest time it was a Genesis exclusive, but now you can play it on the Turtles Cowabunga Collection, which is on pretty much every single platform, as far as I know. And that's a pretty great way to play it. Yeah, especially on Switch, because it's a great game to play on the go. And definitely a great couch co-op game. One of the best co-op beat-em-ups, in my opinion. So I recommend that. It's also a way, like, not that Konami these days really deserves your money per se, but It's one of the better retro re-releases. Like, a lot of care and extra material went into that, and it does play pretty well. Like, I will never not prefer playing it this way on original hardware with this cartridge and on a CRT, but because it's one of those games that unfortunately has been scalped up in price, unless you buy a loose cartridge, sometimes you can still get a decent deal that way. But I would just get it on the Cowabunga Collection and at least throw some support in the direction of the people who are doing good work on these re-releases and compilations. Especially, like I said, ones with all the extra material and like that lets you read the manuals. Even though it's digital, it's not as fun as the real manual, but it's better than not having it at all. And a release like that is running on emulation, but it's among the better emulation that I've personally dealt with. It's a little spotty, like the Game Boy titles are basically perfect. There's some weirdness with the arcade games and the 16-bit games by virtue of it being on emulation, but since it's been brought up, talking about emulation, I'm not the biggest fan of it. I know that's not a popular opinion, but if you're talking about real emulation, like hardware emulation is real emulation. If you look at it historically, when computers first became able to run other applications that weren't meant for that platform, when it was done by software, it was called simulation. So you're using software to run software that was originally meant for a different system. You're tricking it into thinking that it's running on its native system. Whereas hardware emulation is where you have one piece of hardware that is taking the place of another. It's able to sufficiently act as the other piece of hardware. So I am much more into that as far as it pertains to video games and preservation. I think hardware is as important as software in the preservation discussion. I think the design and engineering, the logic and operation of these hardware pieces are just as worthy of the discussion as the software. Like, obviously, if there was only one thing you could preserve, yeah, it should be the games, because, you know, we're not gonna have much of a hobby without them, right? But the other thing is, I think, was software emulation or simulation. You're using software to run software, so there's an automatic inefficiency with that process. And that's one of the reasons why you basically have to use brute force computing to get it to work properly. Like, it's one thing to emulate some Atari 2600 or ColecoVision or television, right? They're sufficiently primitive that any inefficiency in the whole process is pretty negligible. But with each generation, it's not just a matter of, oh, you know, this generation of computers and consoles is this many times more powerful than the previous one. They've also grown cumulatively in complexity in all sorts of other areas as well. So I don't think emulation is the end-all be-all solution to either preservation or accessibility. it's a good option to have, but I'm not really all about it unless it's the most practical, or really the only practical way to go. You know, an obvious one is arcade games that never received a proper home computer or console port to run natively. So yeah, throwing them into something like MAME or an equivalent makes the most sense, right? Especially if the source code's been lost or something like that. Then of course there's the whole deal of, you know, emulation being inextricably tied to the subject of piracy. Like, I don't believe one automatically equals the other, but inevitably it ends up being part of the discussion. I personally do not care to participate in Heist's activities. And I can't say that I have much respect for anyone who does. I doubt that I have enough time left in this video to really deep dive the full extent of my feelings on that subject, but with all that being said, even though I'm not a big fan of software emulation, I'd say if this game looks fun, get the Cowabunga Collection. If you don't have a Genesis, and if it doesn't really seem like you're going to be able to get a good deal on a loose cartridge, right? So. But on a different tack, one other thing that I did want to discuss while filming this, and this is somewhat building off of what I discussed in my Sonic 1 video, talking about how, you know, it's been a struggle to balance the ideas of, you know, making creative projects, but then having that pressure to monetize, or, you know, in some way, you know, kind of have like a product off of your creations, right? And, you know, it's definitely a tough thing to wrangle with, because, you know, real talk, if someone offered me money to do exactly what I'm doing right now, you know, I'd be stupid not to take it, right? And I'd also be kind of pretentious and full of it to, like, act so high and mighty, like, oh, you know, I wouldn't do that just because I have, you know, ethical ethical qualms with big companies, you know, like YouTube and Amazon, who owns Twitch, etc. But there's a difference between being a total sellout and a shill and just being like, hey, just by virtue of putting in the work and sharing my arts and creations, you know, enough of the passion and authenticity resonated with enough people that you just so happen to qualify for whatever criteria they set forth in their partner programs, right? It's just an easy trap to fall into, to get obsessed with metrics, especially, you know, when you're starting out as a small-time creator, and, you know, you get excited when you see a single like or comment on a video, or like, oh, people are actually watching this, and it kind of feeds the ego a little bit, right? Especially in my case, and I'm sure I'm not alone here, where, you know, I've had to contend with a very unhealthy ego for many years. You know, it started seemingly innocently. It's like, you know, when you're a little kid and you're like, oh, people are telling you, like, you know, oh, you're so smart and you're so special and talented and you can do anything you want. And it's like, well, that doesn't really help me when I'm enter adulthood and the workforce for the first time and trying to figure out, like, all right, what am I supposed to do? And then, you know, of course, I've been told as well that, like, you shouldn't waste your time on these silly games or your art, or, you know, I used to play D&D at the time, and I did a lot of artwork for that, and it's like, oh, if it doesn't help you get a job, you shouldn't be doing it, kind of thing. It's like, but at a certain point, you have to just take responsibility for your actions or lack thereof, right? Because you could go all day being like, oh, you know, I didn't get the guidance or advice that I needed at a critical time in life, and, you know, that could even be true, but by a certain point, it's like, hey, you know, you need to be responsible for your own actions. And the truth is, I could have been doing this a long time ago, and should have. You know, it's so weird to think about something like an ego actually causing you to have lower confidence. That seems to be at odds, because you think of people with, like, big, overinflated egos, and it's like, you think of people that are more narcissistic and full of themselves. But it can also be an arrogance that you have that's like, oh, you know, I'm so special, I was meant for greater things than what I'm doing now. But it's like, even if you're a savant and have a natural propensity for certain things, it's like, if you don't put in the work and you're not authentic about it, it doesn't matter. So the ego thing is something that I'm finally, you know, peeling back the layers from, right? It's like, I can't expect that just because my ego says these things that the world owes me, like, a sense of success. Like, I could make something that's considered a brilliant video, but, you know, if I'm not putting in the work and I'm not being authentic and not being true to my own creativity and passion, it's like, you know, aside from random dumb luck, you know, that's not going to lead to any sense of success. So just have to put all that aside and not become fixated on metrics and monetization. And it's like, I'm just here to share what I am most passionate about. I thought I could slide under them. This is bad, because I don't think there's any more pizzas left in the whole game on hard. Like, again, this is another one of those things that I'll probably be repeating. Shoot. I was supposed to slide under them and not jump into them. But I'll be repeating myself a few times about certain things, you know, probably until this channel and series in particular are a lot more firmly established, where I can pretty much say, like, okay, like, if you're coming into this, like, you know, you get it at this point, right? Or at least I hope so. But, you know, I do want this to also be a time capsule for the people I care about, that sucked. And the retro gaming community, like, in this case, Turtles fans, oh, okay. Yeah, if you don't keep these rock soldiers under control, they will ruin your whole playthrough. And like I was discussing with one of my cousins yesterday and into today, you know, despite my life not necessarily being where I want it to be, especially financially and in other ways, like, I do still have a degree of privilege, and I can definitely tell you firsthand that there have been situations I've been in life where I never thought I would even be alive, much less having this kind of gaming setup that I do now. So, for all the reasons I've already mentioned, but also just for the fact that, like, you know, I have no guarantee that I will always be able to do exactly what I'm doing in this moment. So, take advantage of it. And I'm trying to make that the positive version of live for today because there's no promise of tomorrow. It's not do something reckless and stupid and take a pointless risk, or to put that unnecessary pressure on myself to be like, oh, you know, you gotta be a success tomorrow, or else, you know, you're a miserable failure and you suck and you're a loser, because those are the things that I used to tell myself. And I still have to avoid that trap, because there's still a voice in my head occasionally that tries to re-manifest, that wants to say those things, right? And come to find out that, you know, I think as much as anything, it's that wounded ego. It's some, you know, weird-ass survival mechanism that has devolved into something that isn't helping me survive or thrive or find success. It thinks it is. It thinks it's protecting me, but it's definitely not. So, you know, hopefully, along with all the other reasons why I'm making these videos, I can also share something from my story and memories and experiences that can be helpful to someone going through similar struggles. So I'll tell you, I may not have come as close as some other people, and I'm not going to pretend that even at the worst parts of my life, that I had it as bad as some folks do as we speak, right? I want to make that clear, but that said, I very easily could not have been here. And as much as I'm frustrated with a lot of aspects of existence, the state of the world, this country, etc., I am grateful to be able to be in a position to do what I'm doing right now. I may not be getting paid for it, but I am grateful to be in this moment. Even as Krang is being really weird. It's a bit of an unusual boss, because you can't really hit him until he performs certain actions. Like right now, you'd think I could hit him, but... And he's very erratic. He doesn't really follow any particular pattern that I can detect. You just kind of have to coax him into doing a kick attack or the missile attack, and then you can take a shot at him. And you have to really be careful about that punch counterattack. So nowhere near as mercilessly vicious as the Krang boss in Turtles 2, but it can still be kind of tricky. It's easier with Raph because he is so fast that it can just kind of scoot around the boss pretty easily here. Alright, come on. I think this is the longest I've ever taken to beat Krang. I am probably being more cautious than I need to be. Although Raph does not have as much reach either, so that doesn't help. Alright, now it's getting silly. I'm just looking at that one little measly portion of health and like, no! You say that, Krang, but I don't believe you. No pizza. Can she do it? Who can say? Oops. Took my eyes off the prize for a second. Now I'm forgetting if I'm supposed to get another life if I hit 1100 points. What do you think, Raph? Oh, shoot. It had to be Roadkill Rodney. It's getting spooky. It would be Mousers. Is that cheeky or what? Getting nervous. Doesn't that suck? I almost made it through the gauntlet. Got sucker punched by the most basic enemy type. Story of my life, like, seriously, that might be the most perfect representation of my life. Like, in video game microcosm, making the hard stuff look easy, and tripping over my own shoelaces on the easiest things. Alright, let's defeat Shredder. to his credit, he is a lot scarier in the video game than in the cartoon. Because in the cartoon, he's a buffoon. But... Now, that said, he's definitely not as hard. Like, even though he looks the same and has the same music as the the NES Turtles 3 game. But in that game, he's a lot harder. It's pretty easy in this one. Now, that being said, you know, if you get overconfident or screw up your timing, he can still wreck your day. You know, but once you know what each color does of his flame and the strategy, then it's easy. It's just a matter of just keeping up, paying attention. Like, the one attack you really don't want to take chances with is the green fireball, because it's an instant kill. Oh no. I thought I was gonna sneeze for a second. I was like, please don't. I have yet to have that happen during a recording. Silly human body and its weird, unpredictable functions and automatic responses to things. It's like, why don't you give me conscious control over everything? At all times. Can't handle it, right? Well, son of a biscuit. You see how quickly that could go badly? Like, if you get stunned or knocked down in just the right timing, he could then line you up for a green fireball and take you out. It's easy to get a little overconfident and too much of an ego with this boss. See what I did there? Now, I didn't quite hit the challenge that I wanted to, as far as not losing a life. I mean, I blew that, like, several stages ago, but that's eventually my top tier goal with this game, is to clear it on hard without losing any turtles. But I'm happy to have done a playthrough without having to burn a continue. Okay, I have to say it. April's a hottie. And she's got spunk. When was the last time you played a video game that made it feel like a celebration when you reached the end, right? Tell you, when I finished Assassin's Creed Valhalla, I didn't feel like celebrating. It was more like, oh, finally the pain's over. And also, I endured several hundred hours for that ending. It's a whole other thing. Just for point of comparison. So, it seemed like I was on kind of a natural progression. You know, I started with Sonic 1 as my first video in the series, then did Sonic 2 as the second, and it made sense to do Sonic 3, and then I deviated, but it's relevant, because this is among the first Genesis games that I got to play. You know, I didn't know as a kid how long the Genesis had already been on the market by the time this game came out. You know, to me, it was like 1991 with Sonic the Hedgehog. But in fact, the Genesis hit the North American market in 1989, and the Mega Drive was already around in 1988 in Japan. So it's a lot I missed out on, but one of the cool things that I'm excited for in this series is deep diving into other games that I missed completely as a kid. So again, let's kind of start myself off easy with games I'm more familiar with. Outrun, I didn't play as much as this when I was a kid, but at least had some working familiarity with it, and it just seemed like the right time to record that when I did it, so. And a little trivia for you, this is the only Turtles game that had Tatsu. So even though this game does lose some points for lack of boss variety, it still managed to have a unique one, and that's the only part of the Turtles live-action movies that didn't really have any representation outside this game. Like, you know, we had Toka and Razar in a lot of the other games, but Tatsu only in this one. There we go. Thank you for playing, and thank you for watching. At this point, I've settled on, for the time being, just using the raw footage for the uploads, unedited. So it's more or less what you experience if you watch me on Twitch, right? Just minus any reactions to me, you know, seeing what's in the chat, right? So, I hope you don't mind the awkward intro and outro, because my computer is over here, just out of frame. But all the cords to the mic, camera, capture card are just long enough for it to work in the spot it's in right in here. Yes. Epic. So unfortunately, you know, all my USB ports are taken up, so I'm not able to get a mouse over here to be able to just hit stop recording while staying in frame and have a nice clean exit. So just wanted to briefly explain that, you know, until I'm able to afford any modifications to the setup, that you'll just have to pardon a little bit of somewhat unprofessional slinking away as I have to physically go over there to hit stop record. But it's fine, I'm making the best with what I have. If you don't have a little bit of forgiveness for that, what can I say? I mean, you were probably in the wrong spot to begin with, because it's not 4K and it's not running at 120 FPS. You know, I'm not really about the cutting edge here in this channel. I do want to, with the means available to me, continue to improve and hopefully get better at speaking, because I still think I'm pretty bad at it. But having more confidence in front of the camera and being cohesive and saying the things that I wanted to say that I felt were relevant to the game or were thoughts that were a nice stream of consciousness based off of my memories of the game and my reactions to it, right? So yeah, there's Turtles Hyperstone Heist for you. You should go play it, because it's awesome. And you should listen to the music, because it's awesome. But again, thank you for playing, thank you for watching, and laters.